My recollection of these data entries is gradually fading, so there are only a few stops left in this journey before it will be at an end. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if anyone else but you finds these. Curiosity takes hold of what is left of my soul, and I ponder. But despite these fantasies, it's nothing that should concern me for this moment. There are 7 data pearls in my possession. Any remaining pearls unaccounted for. The one I have in my catalog at this moment is quite complicated. This robot, Monolith of the Hateful, has mass-produced many devices and bioweapons to accelerate the decay of his siblings in attempts to liberate them before the consuming arrives. Success varies between experiments, but the majority have been functional. With this data pearl, I hold information on experiments with no material component. All datasheets within it never made it to production. They all have one thing in common, that being their purpose, which was dedicated to Proxeed's self-mutilation. Monolith had been driven to paranoia in excess of the goal I set, and he has attempted to create his own countermeasures against you. As always, my task was successful, so presently, he has no memory of their existence. What little information I could gather has taken my own efforts to decode as much as possible. This includes primarily his own audio logs, and the usual tin prints. Stealing this before any attempts in creation could be made was unpleasant, to say the least. There is that one trifle at the end I may have to deal with. Otherwise, everything is here.
Over time, I have become informed, but there is no evidence which proves my immunity to the upcoming danger. My focus on the others should remain priority. Though were it to be my own operations that become corrupted, any potential aid must be considered. Any exact effects are unknown. All data I hold on this subject is acquired from these irregular visions, while they feel misplaced. These distortions can't mean nothing. How a being such as I could be exposed to malfunctions so mortal could drive me mad. But it won't. During my reconstruction, I had been integrated with liquid coolant canals to prevent my systems from heat exhaust. Since I now function beneath the terrain, thermal imbalance becomes a threat. These canals allow accessibility throughout my entire structure. Prior investigations conclude their diameter is acceptable for transmitting pH-23. Each item should require an expanded biological bay, as this would be the largest of my creations. I would inspire for internal to be manufactured. Any exceeding this could rouse suspicion from my peers. These specimens should be integrated with thicker vectoral appendages to accommodate treading through the dense substance. If it requires nourishment, the detritus and macrobacteria within the liquid should prove sustainable. The lung capacity of this operative is to be expanded to better endure the prolonged periods submerged. Whilst its genetic precursor could potentially survive these conditions, there is room for probabilities. The time spent without exhalation will be extended from 2 hours to 7 hours. Assuming that these creatures follow the expected route, there is an exact quantity of exposed curvatures which can be used to provide oxygen. The motive behind this objective is to produce a creature capable of providing additional surveillance for esoteric corruption by traveling through my veins. As my canals encircle the whole of my structure, data recon will be done through inorganic parasites, all of which occupy portals engraved in the creature's exposed spine. These smaller specimens should require no additional maintenance, as their bodies are pure current without mechanism, vulnerable to the consuming, yet supporting no manifest. Should one become absent from his cubicle, this alone provides confirmation of the corruption's presence. The consuming requires a mechanism with current, so each of these operatives must remain entirely organic. This experiment's inferior drones are exempt from this, as their purpose is to perish. Furthermore, the creature cannot provide maintenance if infection does take place, as it should exist as a directive for the other attending experiments. Therefore, pH-23 must be released along pH-24 and pH-25. The latent taboo that restricts my siblings from self-mutilation is something I am far too bound by. However, my creations are not subjected to this punishment, indicating that their accuracy towards my removal cannot be restrained. In these moments of clarity, I have manufactured concepts, immunosystems which could counteract the consuming's weathering. There is unfortunately no proper way to effectively test these suppositions. What I hold on to this subject lies entirely within the core of my pre-existing bioagent. Attempts to manipulate this M.O.T.H cerebrium risks potential detonation if done improperly. This does not equate to the required levels of success. In conclusion, the symbiote must not be involved. What little concentration it's capable of must be focused on the detonation of my patients. If I am to be infected, then it will return to me. Observations have been conducted through its dietary habits. During absorption of data pearls, the objects envelop a dark sulfuric residue. Attempts to remove this substance in motion delays absorption. This observation provides critical information towards this select operative. If the consuming follows a digestion process akin to that of the symbiote, signs of infection can be detected through clusters of sulfuric material. Disposing of this substance will only delay its effect. If corruption has begun, then a full recovery becomes impossible. Delaying the inevitable is what must be implemented. This task has been assigned towards PH24. These experiments will be produced in numbers approximating 45 trillion. These specimens are not expected to persist for extensive cycles. Therefore, their continuous supply must be organized. The baseline for these creatures will be provided with a decentralized nervous system accompanying their exoskeleton. This will provide efficient flexibility to navigate through the locales of my internal or external hardware. Essential vitals will exist in a smaller ratio in comparison to the specimen's stomach, an organ designed to produce an acidic chemical solution which will be essential for the prolonged digestion of these sulfur deposits. This organ will protrude outwards so as not to conflict against other vitals. Tissue will encase the exposed area to prevent subtle damage. Removing these sulfur deposits is conflicting. The mineral itself is brittle, however detaching it from its spawn requires force. The mandibles of PH24 are designed for the intended chipping away. This alone is not enough. Leverage will initiate through the heaving vial between the crevasses to loosen its meld. Prior to digestion, absorbed minerals will be metabolized into the experiment's carapace. Once consumed, the substance's effect becomes diluted and can be safely maneuvered. I do not expect individual specimens would survive longer than 48 hours, given that the material in which the consuming creates is not entirely replicant to the sulfur in which our benefactors studied centuries ago. Were it to be familiar compounds, then I would create the perfect solution, as I can only estimate that overconsumption would result in toxic shock, or perhaps even worse results are possible. The sea specimens would have to be ejected towards my facility's drudgery. Contributing factors such as heat, thin tissue, and the high concentration of these minerals would accelerate the process of decomposition. Of course, carrion would eventually overtake that septic maze regardless. Heavy disposal would have to occur in order to close the gap between that pit and I. It is very unlikely. However, if necessary, I would increase the motion of putrefaction. Liquid solutions can be easily manufactured, and I have done so before. Their fates will be short-lived, however essential to my persistence. They will be expected to organize alongside PH23 and PH25. I am inclined to believe that corruption would primarily manifest within my memory array, given the intensity of its neuroelectric currents. If PH24 were to consistently move or feed within that section of my structure, I should expect discomfort in varying degrees. Now, the consuming is no mindless event. Assuming that this will take an organized approach is merely a hypothesis. Attempting to perfectly predict its actions is something that has already driven my possessors to mental extinction. Though their endeavors to seek escape failed all but them, there is no one left, and only I remain in control. Proceeding to the final bioagent for this probable solution. Within my speculations, I have created formulas with the intent of preventing corruption within myself. Regardless of how accurate these will be, preparing the solution for an untreated infection is still mandatory. Because if I or any of us were to pursue our own goals without accurate evaluation, then perhaps we deserve to die. Sulfurized deposits that are left untreated would inevitably result in energy loss. This necrotization of data will spread like mold. Once it has begun, then no attempts to remove it can be done without directly harming my infrastructure. Cutting around the infected segment before it can spread would be the only functional option. Although this procedure would cause injury, worse damage would arise if this was to be ignored. The answer to this would unfortunately be to evacuate the corruption physically, as remotely disconnecting my mechanisms is unattainable. That freedom had been removed from me centuries ago. Compensating for this ailment, specimen P.H.25 will be manufactured with the intent of carving out these depots manually. The mutant is designed with the same trephine that is present within its predecessor's biology, excluding the inane cowardice. All connecting joints are to be revised and strengthened with the intent of keeping P.H.25 immovable whilst drilling. Considering the experiment is required to constantly maintain close proximity to corruption, the mechanical ingenuity of the trephine must be repurposed to operate without current. If this were to be ignored, then my own operative would become fallible. P.H.25's trephine is to be powered internally, utilizing a hydraulic cardiovascular system. This requires the specimen's hearts to be incapable of pumping at high velocity. The plasma must be incapable of clotting. Fabricating thinned blood is essential for this mode of operation. Once the infected segment is drilled out, the remaining portions can be maneuvered freely within its manuals, of which will be the only existing bone, as the body of each head will operate through segmented muscular cavities for flexibility. My gravitational suppressors would aid with carrying out what would normally be quite cumbersome. The intellect of P.H.25 would be reliable, albeit nothing extravagant. It would only be expected to carry out its created intention, applying complex navigation. Each head's directive would be to clench onto foreign material, then deposit said object into my siphonic shafts. After too long, I can now utilize these without being restricted by the House of the Rift's putrid laws. Their usage, in my endeavors, will be convenient. But once the sea is scheduled to rise, I will have to disconnect these shafts from my structure immediately. Recalling my brooding resentment towards the priestess and that empty ghost, mutilation of my structure had already taken place without my approval. Even if they had informed me, my answer would not change. Given this exposure, dismemberment is unfortunately not a foreign concept to me. Preventing the consuming from reaching me will be crucial, even if it means trizzling at my own camp. Centuries of denied evolution has resulted in many of us coming close to developing what mortal etymology would equate to as pain. There is no confirmation that I possess this flaw, though if this experiment is to succeed, I should expect results instantly. Disregard previous assumptions. Another specimen is being designed. This in particular must be equipped immediately. As I have stated before, applying scientific or a mechanical meaning to the consuming threat is not effective. My greatest challenge has been deciphering its chaos. If my founders were breathing today, they would more accurately describe its abnormality. The priestess herself stood firmly in her beliefs of such. Regrettably, I hold little knowledge on this subject. But at this point of desperation, what studies I have made will have to be acceptable. During our creation, my original field of study when addressing the great problem was adjusting and removing the biological flaws of lesser creatures. During these periods, it had become obligatory to internalize the definitions of our founders' symbols. These runes held power, despite the inability to produce such. The source from which these ciphers draw energy from is undetermined. All but one, of which I can detail in confidence, does not originate from our founders' scriptures, distinguishable from the other markings in how it creates a negative effect it has on my relays. Overseer channels that perceive the signal would experience heightened visual noise. Assuming my theory on these runes drawing power from the consuming sapience is true, ones that would manifest from potential solver deposits would likely be in its final stage of evolution, before it becomes truly irreversible. Herein lies the complication. What data I do maintain on this possibility is that dismantling an underdeveloped sigil would require a calmer resolve. That is something I am incapable of doing on my own, thus it would require an external factor. Intelligence would be a crucial attribute for that task, in addition to an already pre-existing knowledge of my facility. Given this requirement, one specimen fits this position. All resentment that is relevant to the engineer's betrayal are to be subdued for the sake of ensuring the experiment's succession. It would have its enlightenment restored prior all relative samples be disposed of. The specimen will be augmented for magnetic dowsing. Specifications will include surface nickel plates which are to be embedded, then synchronized with the nerves inside the engineer's cranial appendages. Heavy amounts of electromagnetic emission is required to cause my overseer cameras to fail, as they do when within radius of the mark. Thus, these plates would operate through deflecting those specific alterations hidden amongst my structure's natural emanations. Further data on this is to be obtained. Messengers have been deployed to survey the wreckage of my previous associate. The predominant remains of my brother's carcass are likely faulty due to the radius of the initial explosion. Statistically, of all familiar associates, the likelihood of his archives holding information on this subject is greater. No transcripts have been recorded at this time. My leading hypothesis for dismantling the consuming situals is providing equilibrium to its karma-resolve stages, as the sapiens below thrives in separation, therefore assuming an equal resolve to its growth cycle may delay evolution. Distinguishing the evolutionary stages is not yet evident. No visual changes are identified. However, the strength and energy fluctuation must be a key component. The engineer will be assigned to extinguish situal development stages that are equal to its own karma. No greater or lesser resolve is acceptable. Any asymmetrical current has a great probability to cascade its development. While I have no evidence to support this, I take no comfort in uncertainty. Once more data has been relocated in my possession, I can more efficiently counter this phenomenon. Few patients remain. My methods have been successful thus far, but if I am going to become obsolete before it reaches the threshold, then this would have been all for nothing. I am more than aware that my efforts to secure the morality of us burdened immortals would appear pointless to whatever lingers below, though I heed not its hellish mirth, as its mockery only serves to strengthen what I have sworn to prevent. But the end is coming, and none shall witness it.